Hi, so I wanted to make and release a video that sort of details the process behind my paintings. And over the last couple of weeks, I have been working on a commission of a sweet doggy named Molly. And this is the sort of painting that's pretty run of the mill for me, so I figured it would be a great place to start. So, some background on this piece. The client commissioned me to do a painting of his dog, Molly, as a gift for his girlfriend. And since I know they both love Molly like parents love a child, I wanted to make sure that I captured an appropriate composition and mood for the piece. I wanted to make something that when my client saw it, it would fill them with joy. So I had my client send me over several photographs and tell me a little bit about Molly. So, of course, he says that Molly has a huge personality. And one of the first things that stood out to me in her photographs were how large and expressive her eyes were. So I knew right away that I wanted to somehow exaggerate or draw attention to those eyes. Sometimes I will create my own composition just based off several photographs, but other times a client will send me a photo that they really like and they feel that represents the subject the best. And if that's the case, I will just go with that photograph. The difficulty in creating your own composition is that sometimes, if you're painting a dog, the final painting can end up looking like just any other dog of the same breed. And so, when it's said and done, I do prefer working from a good photograph. It helps me to accurately portray my subject for who they really are. So, after the client agrees on a size and a price, I will go out and I will purchase a pre stretched, pre primed canvas from the locally owned art store. And I think my old painting professor would probably frown, but meh. So this client wanted a 12 by 12 inch canvas. In this case, I will not be using any gesso. The first thing I do is I stain it. And I stain it because it is known that working from a purely white surface can actually distort colors to the eye as you mix and apply them. A pigment that appears medium brown on a gray surface can actually appear almost black on a white surface. And the important thing to note about color is that it is largely relative. Our eyes perceive color as they relate to nearby colors all of the time. So I stain the canvas with raw umber. Raw umber, lesser known son of great John Umber, who first proclaimed Rob king in the north. Okay, sorry, you don't know how long I've been waiting to make that joke. Raw umber is a somewhat cooler brown. You can stain the canvas with a variety of different colors, but keep in mind that any color you choose will affect any other color that you apply over the top. I once used ultramarine blue as an underpainting, and my subjects had a lot of orange in them, so I found it really grounded those dense, warm tones that can sometimes look fanciful, and I really liked it a lot. But I find raw umber is neutral enough to provide enough flexibility for play. So all I need to stain is my pigment, a wide brush, some odorless turpentine, and a Pokemon cup. It is of no import whether the Pokemon cup is first, second, or third generation. Now I apply a dab of pigment to the center of the canvas and begin to dilute it with odorless turpentine. I evenly spread it all over, making sure to apply it to the sides of the canvas as well. I do not worry over the visible brushstrokes, and I actually quite like a more painterly quality in a piece. The stain will dry relatively quickly, so in the meantime, I set about planning my composition. First, I pet a kitty, or two, and then I open my sketchbook and I refer back to the correspondence between myself and my client. I write down any important information that they included. Sometimes a client will want me to include a special toy or a detail, and I certainly wouldn't want to forget that. So next, I quickly sketch out any ideas that pop into my head about how I want to arrange the subject on a 12 by 12 space. Oftentimes, visually assessing a composition that was floating around in my head could actually lead me to change my mind. This particular job is pretty straightforward, in that the client gave me a photo he really liked. I must say, I agree with the client here. So I begin to sketch out Molly with a pencil. Now, this process is quick. I do not spend a lot of time here trying to nail down the tiniest details. Some artists prefer their preliminary sketches to be highly detailed and accurate, Some artists will do small pre-paintings before they even begin on the final painting. These artists are far better artists than I am, and they are probably also paid a lot more. But what I aim to accomplish here is just getting a better idea for forms and values that I discover within the dog. I change the direction of the pencil strokes in order to examine the muscular structure. I try to mimic these pencil strokes later with my paintbrush. I'm finding the highlights, the dark shadows, and it just prepares me for what comes next. The stain will dry in a few hours, but I left mine overnight. Since my client has a photograph that he really enjoys, and since I agree, I want to essentially just work from that photograph. So I'm going to use a grid system here. I measure out 2-inch blocks and grid my canvas with a ruler and a pencil. I then label my grid from A to F and 1 to 6. I go back and forth between using the grid system and freehand drawing my subjects. It really just depends. And no, it's not cheating, it's just a shortcut. I then take my client's photo and bring it into Adobe Illustrator. I open a new document at the size of my canvas, that is, again, 12 inches by 12 inches. I drop the photo of Molly in, and then I move and scale the photo around until I find a composition I prefer. I will not explain exactly what's happening here, although I can later if you like. I am essentially just using an array of tools to find the best layout. So since the photo was taken from a cell phone in a vertical orientation, it is long and skinny and does not fit well within the square. I want to be able to capture both those cute little front paws and to be able to fill the space. So I am compensating by just filling in the white areas with a tan color to get a better visual. Then I create a new layer. This new layer is going to serve as my grid layer. I measure out 2-inch spaces and then label my layers that will correspond to my canvas. So when I've got that, I then step back into the real world. I take a stick of soft vine charcoal and I begin to draw out my subject on the grid. Here it is finished. I have not only done an outline, but I have blocked in some values as well. Next, for the underpainting. The underpainting is where I implement what I have learned about Molly from my prior sketching. I am doing the underpainting in the same raw umber as before. I mix the raw umber with liquid medium by Winsor & Newton. This medium speeds drying and improves the consistency of my pigment. I am going straight over the top of the vine charcoal, and I'm refining lines and establishing values. The reason I'm doing an underpainting is that I feel it prepares me for when I apply the final strokes. It helps me to get one last sense of things before I jump into applying the color, as far as brushstroke direction, composition, etc. While that sets, I begin mixing my colors at last. My palette is a neutral gray tempered glass that I ordered online. I find using glass as opposed to wood helps reduce the amount of paint wasted, and it also is much easier to clean. One of the first things I do is I mix my own black using burnt umber and ultramarine blue. There are several different ways to mix your own black. A lot of artists do not even bother with it, and they use it straight from the tube. However, unless you are buying a paint brand which does mix its own black from these hues, you could be using a very severe, very true black, which a lot of painters will say completely sucks out the color of a piece. They argue that there is no true black in nature, and that black objects are always reflecting and absorbing the hues around them, and that you should always derive your blacks from the colors found nearby in your painting. So I did have a video of myself mixing my own black, but the video file got lost. So here are the colors I have laid out from the tube, save the black. They are white, black, burnt umber, burnt sienna, cadmium red, alizarin crimson, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, lemon yellow, cobalt teal, ultramarine blue, dioxazine purple, and at the very end I have my liquid medium. The liquid medium, again, improves the consistency of the paint and also induces a chemical reaction, which causes the oil paints to polymerize, that is, harden. since oil paints do not technically dry the same way that ink does. But you can see from my color palette that I like to choose both cool and warm versions of the same colors. The cool versions are for shadows and the warm for highlights. So now that I've gotten a base to work from, I mix some colors that I see in the photo. So the black of the dog, the tan portions of the dog, and the blanket are the three largest areas that I see. I also noticed that the subject is cast in sort of a magenta hue due to the blanket that she's sitting on. I choose to keep that general hue, but I do plan on diverging from the pattern and color of the blanket in a bit. When the colors are mixed and the underpainting is set, it's time to begin with the first layer of color. Before I begin, I apply a mixture of 1/2 walnut oil to 1/2 odorless turpentine in a dropper to the surface of the canvas. I use a makeup sponge to coat it evenly. This, I find, helps lubricate the surface and also helps to even out the sheen as I work. Then I begin blocking out color sections. I look back and forth at my reference photo, taking great care to place the colors accurately. I'm still remaining somewhat loose here. Final corrections will take place on the final layer. I've always enjoyed paintings that are expressive and loose, with clearly visible brush strokes. So I find that I just paint that way. I do not make a lot of effort to create something that looks exactly like the photograph. I've always felt that my weakest paintings have been those where I try to mimic the photograph too closely. I throw on a dark color on the background with the intention of going back over it with a lighter color at the end, allowing the dark color to peek through. I don't know, I'm just fond of the look. When I am finished, I clean off my palette and I store it in a special airtight case. I put the case in the freezer until I need it again. Again, since oils do not dry the same as inks, you can slow down the chemical process by keeping the temperature low. The paints will keep in the freezer for weeks depending on the pigment. So when the color block layer has set, it's time to do the detail layer. The detail layer is sometimes the final layer, sometimes requires one more. I paint in layers because painting alla prima has never really worked for me, although I love it and I wish I could do it, and I'm not sure how they get the paint that thick. I mean, maybe it's the brand I'm using. It could be possible since I've had these paints since college, and that was 8 years ago. But at any rate, this is the process that I have found that works best for me. So I do not film myself going over the detail layer. This is largely because I don't really have a great setup and I'm just using my laptop to record this. But sometime soon I hope to properly record a painting start to finish. But with the detail layer, it's essentially the same process. I am now just looking more closely at the folds of the skin around the eyes, the way the light reflects upon their spherical shape, the way the nose reflects color, the way the ears connect to the head. All of these things I have to pay attention to simultaneously to recreate the form that is Molly. The blanket now has a lighter layer of paint applied to it. I think it was a good choice as it doesn't overpower the subject. I will go over the top of the blanket one more time with a pattern that is similar to the blanket in the photo. I find the pattern to be interesting enough. So here it is finished. You can kind of see I have strayed away from the photograph. I have sort of done my own thing on the blanket. I think it's really nice because it draws your eye into the subject. A little different. I also like how you can see those brush strokes, which is something I'm very fond of. And voila! That is my process from start to finish. Each painting I do typically requires something a little different, of course, and I am constantly evolving as an artist. So I hope you all found that rather illuminating.